Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Thank you so much for doing that song. Thanks. I was so excited about the music today. It's very exciting. And I love that phrase at the end, Jai Guru Deva, a loose interpretation of the Sanskrit message is knowledge from a source other than one's small self. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, collective wisdom. And thank you for being here and listening. I've begun traveling to different communities around the state to learn what people value, how they see their visions for a stronger future come to life. I call this the Hometown Values and Vision Tour. It's a series in the Changemakers Alliance network that Minnesota Women's Press is building. Changemakers Alliance, or CALL, is where we develop online stories and in-person conversations for continuous series around a few core topics. Reimagining public safety is another one of those series. We've hosted conversations, and I've been writing extensively about it for the past few months. As Phil's reading indicated, 100 years ago, Reverend John Dietrich wanted us to create a new group morality that treated injustice and exploitation just as we treat individual crimes. In the 1920s, Dietrich also delivered a talk called New Justice for Old, where he said, "Our whole system of criminal justice is based on vindictive punishment without ever inquiring as to the cause of the guilt. The scientist is not interested in the expression of vengeance or the punishment of the offender. He will observe human conduct and seek to penetrate the hidden sources from which it springs. I believe without doubt that an offender should be detained as long as he is a menace to public safety, but he should be detained for only one reason: to restore him to physical, mental, and moral health." Michelle Braley of Seward Longfellow Restorative Justice is one of the people we have been featuring for the Changemakers Alliance series. I moderated a Minneapolis conference in June in which she said, "Part of the challenge is we've spent 400 years building a system that has led people to believe that punishment works." She received a call from the Hennepin County Attorney General's office wanting to talk about whether restorative justice has proven to be effective. She responded that they should sit down with their prosecutors and ask them about success in the punishment system. Quote, "I've been on the hot seat for 20 years trying to prove to people that restorative justice works. All the data is on our side, yet we don't ask enough hard questions about the billions of dollars we put into the retributive system. My restorative justice budget is under $100,000. You know what would work a lot better? If we funded it." Here on this stage, a few months ago, I learned from a guy named Shay at a Changemakers Alliance event. He said that while he was incarcerated for violence, he learned about empathy in a workshop hosted by Alternatives to Violence Project, otherwise known as AVP. AVP asks questions that engage people in one-on-one and group conversations. Questions are not simply designed to help the individual understand themselves, but also to learn what has challenged someone else. Shay said that understanding things from another point of view, sharing that two-way vulnerability about fears and trauma and anger, quote, "helps to break a cycle. After that, you can help fix something that you've broken. To really understand that things start somewhere and where they started, to do that true self-reflection is when things change." Another person who spoke at our event was Tom. Like Shay, Tom is an AVP facilitator who joined the program in 2015 as a community-based volunteer. When he attended his first workshop with incarcerated people, he said he assumed they would be closed-minded and would not be vulnerable in a group setting. But he said he learned on that first day that he was wrong. He said, "How to be nonviolent is our whole goal. We do role-playing, and the guys love it. It builds community. It's been remarkable." I work with Leah from AVP, which is a volunteer organization. She couldn't be here today, but is Mike here? There's Mike. Mike Texler from AVP is here, and he'll be available, thank you, after my talk if people want to learn more about Alternatives to Violence Project. Thank you, Mike. A few weeks ago, I learned at the Black Men Healing Conference about the Next Step program. There are 20 people in the program who are on call to visit hospital rooms, often the Hennepin County Medical Center, shortly after someone, often a young person, is shot or stabbed. If the victim survives, the conversation begins. It's not a chat about what got them into a violent situation, but about what they want to do next. Sometimes Next Step mentors will work with somebody for years as they work to become someone transformed through simple acts of conversation and compassion. One of the Next Step team members said, quote, "People can go back to issues from way back in childhood that they have been holding in for years. Trauma that sometimes has been passed down from one generation to the next. Helping people unpack that has been an incredible experience." What these stories tell me is that powerful transformation happen in the collective when we are taken out of the isolation of unspoken fears and hurts embedded in our hearts and minds. Talking freely about what we care about, what we want to see in our futures, and what challenges and inspires us makes a big difference. Talking from the inside out about what matters to us, and also getting to the why. I bought Minnesota Women's Press 5.5 years ago, thanks to a bank loan and my mother's down payment. As I was stepping into the role of publisher and editor, I finished writing the rough draft of a novel called Evolve. Each letter in the title represents elements that the main character believes are essential for human evolution. E for energy, the subtle shifts that happen when we connect with others and nature. V for visibility, having everyone seen and recognized. The second V in Evolve stands for vulnerability. The last E stands for error. A few weeks ago, after my son Dylan returned from his first year of college in Oregon and explorations in Alaska, he was looking for new reading material. I pulled down a 1979 book by Lewis Thomas called The Medusa and the Snail. I randomly opened up to a page that I realized was a perfect encapsulation of why E for error is part of our evolutionary process. Thomas wrote, quote, "We think our way along by choosing between right and wrong alternatives, and the wrong choices have to be made as frequently as the right ones. The capacity to blunder slightly is the real marvel of DNA. Without this special attribute, we would still be anaerobic bacteria, and there would be no music. The molecule of DNA was ordained from the beginning to make small mistakes. If the best minds were pooled together, we would have found a way to correct this, and evolution would have stopped in its tracks." By the way, Reverend David would want me to pause here to say that the word error comes from a Latin root meaning to wander, looking for something. It is not a bad word. Lewis Thomas wrote about how debates engage our thought processes that help us move somewhere new. It might be easy for some of us in this room and watching online to resonate with the idea that transformative justice, working through something collectively after someone's made a mistake, is a much better response to public safety than simply incarceration. But what about other errors in judgment that people make? In a recent story, I wrote about gun violence legislation in the Omnibus Public Safety Bill, and I quoted Representative Matt Grossell, a Minnesota legislator from Clearbrook. He opposed giving funds to, quote, untested, untried nonprofits instead of putting the money where it should be, into law enforcement communities so they can do the job that we have asked them to do, to stop evil, to do good, to protect our communities. Most of us here might agree that Grossel is mistaken, that evil does not equate with committing a crime, and law enforcement is not uniformly doing good, protecting everybody. With the DFL trifecta, the public safety bill passed this year on partisan lines, but I wonder what happens in a few years if people who opposed it are back in political power in Minnesota. Will they be convinced that the bill accomplishes what it sets out to do, to make our communities safer? And how will they get to that understanding? Talking from the inside out about what matters to us and get to the why. I had a few days of vacation in Colorado recently where I had the chance to talk extensively with a person that I would describe as a libertarian modern-day cowboy. He has equated feminism with setting ourselves on a path where more women lead in the future by virtue of the fact that they're graduating from college at higher rates than men. He equates that with men kind of stagnating as minions, as he called it, without a real purpose. I'm simplifying his argument, but suffice it to say that his view, as is the case with so many, is that if some segment of the population wins, that means that another one loses. Of course, that's the individualistic thinking that there are winners and losers for everything, and you do everything you can to be on top. The feminist perspective, I told him, is not about that. In the past, it was about leveling the playing field so that men and women could have the same equal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the new definition of feminism is much more than that. The people we feature in our magazine, and that has included feminist men lately, are not looking to have superiority, but to support the inherent dignity and worth of everyone, from birth to death. Our mutual friend in Colorado tells me that the guy I talked to is now starting to understand feminism as less about taking something away from men and more about a humanitarian effort. Yay! And I also better recognize just how threatening change can seem, even to a middle-aged cowboy. Why it matters how we talk as much as what we say. Vulnerability and trust and conversation get to the heart of fears embedded deep inside. In the 1940s, Pierre Teilhard put his thoughts down in a book called The Phenomenon of Man. It wasn't published until after his death in 1955 because it was rejected by the church, and Teilhard was a faithful Jesuit priest. He gave the manuscript to a friend to publish after he died. In the original introduction to Teilhard's book, Julian Huxley wrote, "An isolated brain is a piece of biological nonsense, as meaningless as an isolated human individual. Teilhard knew that a developed human being is a person that has transcended individuality." The book was republished recently, now called The Human Phenomenon, with an introduction by Brian Swim, who wrote that we don't need to discover new galaxies and stars in our universe. The new frontier is expanding into a new form of human being. In a biography of Teilhard, who also had been a paleontologist, Ursula King said he became less and less interested in the past and more interested in where we're going, what we're doing with the potential we have, with the imagination, the creativity, the consciousness, the complexification of people thinking together and acting together. Teilhard's optimistic view was that the universe of matter and mind would gradually increase in our collective oneness, partly because of global transmission of ideas and knowledge thanks to the emerging field of computers. He basically envisioned the internet before it existed. On the other hand, there's the more pessimistic outlook of Milan Kundera, who died this week. He's long been a favorite author of mine, most known for The Unbearable Lightness of Being, though personally my favorite is Immortality. In an interview in 1980, Kundera said, quote, "It seems to me that all over the world, people nowadays prefer to judge rather than to understand, to answer rather than to ask, so that the voice of the novel can hardly be heard over the noisy foolishness of human certainties." My Hometown Values and Vision Tour is my attempt to ask questions, to explore, and to learn what Minnesotans who come to the conversations care about, talking from the inside out about what matters to us and get to the why. Last week I was in Ortonville, a town of 2,000 on the South Dakota border, to talk with more than a dozen people about rural health care, housing, and sustainable agriculture. A realtor there is passionate about housing disparities. A radiologist has created a mini village out of her garage where she has rescued cats and dogs, and her team helps them find new homes. I met entrepreneurial women who have converted unused spaces into a florist shop, an art gallery, and locally made gift boutiques. I've connected with a few mothers on the Iron Range about their desire to have stronger sex education in public schools. I met people in Fergus Falls who are using art and creativity to transform and heal communities. I visited with people at Peace House on Portland Avenue, where unhoused people come to congregate for a few hours during the day to talk and share a meal together. One woman I met there said she's no longer unhoused, but she still comes to connect with her friends. I was in Chisholm for Juneteenth, where a Latina woman named Serafia is breaking down racism person by person. She had the mayor and the police chief in a dunk tank, and soul food was served from a biker bar. You can read some of what we're learning so far in the current issue of Minnesota Women's Press outside, the melanated Main Street issue. Thanks to the Wilson Fund of the First Unitarian Foundation, we'll be able to have larger events in Worthington and Wilmer and Grand Rapids, where we're going to offer food that is locally grown and produced. We also want to do more about eliminating gender-based violence. Global Rights for Women, where my daughter Sophia works, recently published a 140-page report about how the Minneapolis Police Department handles domestic violence calls. It's not well. We wrote about it, but it's gotten very little attention otherwise. One special project I would like to see come to fruition is sharing the story written by Danielle Trueblood Lynch. She wrote a one-act play from personal experience about why so many people who have experienced traumatic childhoods, often involving sexual assault and abuse, end up incarcerated. I'm trying to raise funds to film the reading of her one-act play so that people around the state can better understand why we need to pass a Survivors Justice Act in Minnesota. Similar to legislation we have for veterans who experience PTSD, the Survivors Justice Act would take trauma into account for sentencing for a crime and not simply isolate people, but restore them to physical, mental, and moral health, as Dietrich wanted to see. Danielle said at our March event that after she was incarcerated for reacting violently to someone who had assaulted her young daughter, she asked herself, quote, "How can incarcerating me solve or cure that old childhood trauma? There were no doctors in there that I could talk to. I realized it would have to be me to start to unpack things. I found my purpose, to unpack the secrets, because there were other women surrounding me while I was incarcerated who were dealing with the same issue." You can read more of her story and the Survivors Justice Act at womenspress.com. If Minnesota can become a state that more collectively understands the nature of trauma, how much transformation can happen in conversation rather than simply punishment or canceling, and how much stronger our communities are when that happens, Reverend Dietrich would be very proud. Talking from the inside out about what matters to us and get to the why. Because knowledge comes from a source other than our small self. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.